Well, it's been a blessing. Nehemiah chapter 2 is where we'll turn in our Bibles. I said it wasn't going to be very long, didn't have very much. But the basis for what's on my heart, I guess I probably need to start out with an illustration because to just kind of bring it all together. Being raised up in the family that I was raised up in, there were some boundaries that my parents set, and they were pretty critical to my raising because of those boundaries that my dad and my mom set in their early marriage and young family. It kept a lot of things away from me because that's what boundaries do. Whenever you, how many of y'all have a privacy fence near your home? You set a privacy fence, it's a boundary. You set it up on the property line usually. It's a boundary. It prevents something from coming across or maybe viewing whatever's happening on your side. Why? Well, for different reasons maybe. Maybe I was over at a piece of property yesterday and they said that they had put up this picket fence because they had a bear coming up through there all the time, and they didn't like that bear coming up through there all the time, so they stuck up a boundary to prevent it. And then sometimes boundaries, though, those boundaries my mom and dad set, they not only kept things from getting to me, but they kept me from getting to other things. Yeah. Because that's what boundaries do. Sometimes, how many of y'all have ever had a critter of some sort? Maybe it was livestock, maybe it was a dog or a cat or something like that, and you put a fence up. Me and my wife, we got a dog, and we just got one of those invisible fences. You stick a collar on it, and it's, the dog can't see where the boundary is, but whenever it gets right to that boundary, that thing starts beeping, and it knows it probably ought to go too much further. It's to prevent our dog from getting into our neighbor's trash. It's to prevent our dog from getting to something. So those boundaries were there that my mom and dad set, and at first, to be honest, I didn't know any different. I lived with those boundaries all my life, and I knew nothing different than that. And I'm not sorry for it. Amen. My mom and dad are not the standard of setting boundaries. So the things that I say doesn't mean that this is the standard that you should live by. Yours might ought to be higher. Maybe maybe you don't see the necessity of setting them as high. It's just, you better talk to the Lord about where you ought to set your boundaries. Because if you do it just because somebody else did it, it's not going to be, that boundary's not going to be there very long. Right. Those boundaries came in way of convictions and standards that my mom and dad had. They got rid of the TV before I was ever born. I don't remember I never remember a TV being in our home. But they set a standard, they set a boundary, and they said, we're not going to allow these things into our home, and the only way to not allow them into our home is to get rid of it. They got rid of it. We didn't listen to the radio very often that I remember because there were things on there they didn't want us to hear. And whenever they did have the radio on, it was usually one station, and it was the gospel station. And usually it was... Dad, I don't know why. I still don't know why. But Dad had a habit of wanting to turn on the news at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was trying to sleep. And that's usually when I heard the gospel station. Dad still has that habit of doing things like that. So anyway, that was usually, so the radio was a very, non-pleasant thing for me to hear. Just horrible memories, gospel station or not. It was just, that was just not the time for me to listen to the radio. But so there were boundaries that they set. There were boundaries that they set in our dress standards. There were boundaries that they set in our music standards. There were boundaries that they set. They wouldn't allow filthy magazines to come into our home. Why? Because they wanted not only, they set that boundary to keep something out, but it was also to keep me from getting to something. Wasn't it?
Right. Yes, sir, it was.
Now the effect may not appear whenever they're this small, but once they get up to adults, it sure does show up, doesn't it?
Amen.
Those little influences whenever they're small.
Amen. Yes.
So that was the kind of boundaries. My mom and dad built walls around us. They built walls around us in regards to dating and those kinds of things. And I'm so thankful for those things. The Lord wound up bringing my wife into my life. And I didn't date around everywhere. Now that was a boundary that they set. And it was something that after I left home, I wanted to maintain because I saw the benefits of it. I saw the benefits of it in my brothers and a few other people. But I also saw, they told me what the results would be otherwise, or very easily could be otherwise. And so they said, we're going to set this boundary here. And so I don't want you to cross this boundary. And in fact, it was more than a boundary, it was a wall. It was a wall of defense, both from the outside and from me getting to things. Boundaries are absolutely necessary. Right now, there's a lot of discussion going on about this wall down on the south because it's a boundary. And there's some people for it and some people against it. It doesn't really matter what side you are on. If they have that wall there, there's going to be a lot less people coming the north.
Right.
It's just the facts.
That's right.
And incidentally, if things keep getting bad, there'll be a lot fewer people going south too. So it works both ways. So there's boundaries. Now, that's in a family setting. And in the story that we'll be reading directly, you'll find something interesting, that there were a number of people that had strong homes. Now, you don't find that because I'm not going to have time to read the whole book of Nehemiah today. But you'll read that there were certain people who had strong homes within the confines of Jerusalem. And you know why? Because they didn't have any walls. There were no walls around Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar had torn them down somewhere around, best I can tell, about 100, maybe 110 years before. Nebuchadnezzar had come in and they had leveled the walls. They had torn down the gates. And so these people, they came back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. You remember that in the book of Ezra? Zerubbabel led a whole bunch of them back, and then later Ezra came and he taught them the law and all those things. Well, there were no walls. And so the people were in great distress, and that's how the book of Nehemiah starts out. Nehemiah is the king's cupbearer back there in Babylon, or in Persia. And anyway, and he comes before the king. The king says, "Why is your countenance sad?" He said, "How can I not be sad?" He said, "Whenever the place of my people is torn down and the gates thereof are burned with fire, how can I not be sad? They're in great distress. There's issues." And so these people, they had come back to rebuild the temple, and they had built strong homes, a lot of them, because that was their only protection against the enemy. My mom and dad built a strong home to protect me from the enemy. Now, once again, I'm not going to have a lot of time. How many of y'all are familiar with the book of Nehemiah?
Somewhat.
Fairly familiar. You know who are the bad guys in the book of Nehemiah? The Arabians. Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabians. And they are the picture of the world. They're the picture, because you know what they did? They mocked the people of God. And that's what the world does. They look at us, what we're doing. You know, why do you go down to church every week? Why do you live the way you live? Ain't that silly? You know, you guys live by all these rules and you live your life according to a book. Or you say you do. And that's the question. Because what we find here, I'll just read chapter 2, verse 17. Nehemiah had come back and he had just made a circuit of all the walls and he had inspected Jerusalem. And then all of a sudden he says in verse 17, chapter 2, he says, "Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build the walls of Jerusalem, that we may be no more a reproach." What is a reproach? I saw that. What is a reproach? It's the embarrassing thing.
Yep.
You know. And did you know that the Jews right here were, if you read the history, and I'm going to catch you up really quick on where they were because of time, but the Jews were not following God at this time all the way. Neither were they mixing too well. They were riding the line. They were in the gray area, as we like to call it. There is no gray area, by the way. But they wanted to identify themselves with God, and so they had this temple. But they wanted to be attached over here with the world too, because you read that Sanballat and Tobiah and some of them, they were relatives of some of these because they'd married across the line. They were marrying into the world, and that's what this is a picture of. And incidentally, if you read in here, you'll find out Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabians were no friends of these people, but they were brother-in-laws or maybe father-in-laws, or in some way they were connected. And so the children of Israel right here, they were riding the fence. They weren't one thing and they weren't another, so they were a reproach. They were a reproach to God, and they were a reproach to the land. Because, there's a lot of us Christians that, and I've been in this position, I know by experience, where you're kind of lukewarm, and you got friends amongst the lost folks, we got amongst the world, and so they're friends with you until they get around some of their other more worldly friends, and then all of a sudden you're an embarrassment. Right. Don't really want to be, this guy, he's just suddenly an acquaintance because, we do things together and kind of have fun and stuff, but, he's got some weird ideas. So, suddenly, he's an embarrassment. He's a reproach. And so the children of Israel found themselves in this position. And then as a lukewarm Christian, we also go to church and you walk in, and a lot of times you may dress like everybody else, but you can see it on your face when you ain't right with God. And suddenly you're a reproach to God, because the world knows that you're not clean and you're not living for the Lord all the way, but you still go to church sometimes. And so it doesn't matter where you go, you're a reproach. That's where they were. It didn't say that they were a reproach to God or that they were a reproach to Sanballat. It says they were a reproach. And that's where they were. Sanballat was embarrassed that Jerusalem is a part of our territory. Their city lies waste, and they claim to be God's people. And but we know better, because they're amongst us a lot of times, and we see what they do on the side. Yeah. And God's looking down there and He's saying, this ain't going to work. They don't represent me. So they're a reproach. Doesn't matter what side they go to. So it says, so he said, Nehemiah, he says, let's build these walls up. And he said, so that we're no longer a reproach. He said, we're going to create a boundary so that there's a separation. It's going to keep some things out, and it's going to keep some things in. And there's going to be a separation so that we're no longer a reproach. They're not going to be a reproach to God, or, in some way, they're going to get off the line, is what he's saying. We're going to get away from the lines. And he said, so it says, then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me. I like that. I remember Brother Mark redefining good in my mind. It's the best. So the hand of God was good upon me, as also the king's word words that he had spoken unto me, and they said, Let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. Now, I'll just quick read on down through here so you get the character of the rest of these people. It says, But then Sanballat the Hornite and Tobiah the servant of the Ammonite and Gershom the Arabian heard it. They laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, What is this thing that they do? Will they rebel against the king? Then answered I them and said unto them, The God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. In other words, Nehemiah right there drew a line. And he said, Sanballat, he said, there's a line now. You've got no right, you've got no portion, and you've got no memorial here anymore. This is a line. We're dividing right here. This is the point of separation. You can't come any closer, and we're not coming out to you because there's a division. This is our territory. So this is the climate and the situation. And the reason why it spoke so much to me is because this is very much the climate and the situation right now where we live. At the Ezra Inman House, we've been in great distress. And Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians have all been pushing up closer and closer. And I can have a strong home. Me and my wife, we have a trust between us. And when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians try to push in, me and my wife, we talk to one another about it. And that's a trust. There's a boundary. There are places I don't go. There's places she don't go. Because there's a boundary. There's a limit. We've confined ourselves to that. And you say, well, Brother Ezra, you've not been married very long. It doesn't matter. It only takes one day. It only takes a moment. There have been a couple times already in our marriage that I called my wife because I was in a bad position. And she's my accountability. Right. And so I had to call her, tell her, this is what's going on. I want you to know it. Because if anybody else was to tell you, I wouldn't want you to think anything different. This is what's going on. That's a trust. It's something that's important. And if I don't do that, there gets the chance of something coming between us. I don't have any time for anything to come between us because this is something that God gave me, and I'm going to defend it. This is my territory. This is my responsibility. I put these walls up here because this is what I'm supposed to protect. And nobody's allowed to come between that. And you should have the same thing. You should have accountability. Now, I've watched the example of my mom and dad, and you know, they had a very similar thing. There were things that rules and things that they put in place, and when there were things in their marriage that they faced, because of the things that they had built, the boundaries that they had built, there was a protection there. And there was never a time in my life as a child that I ever suspected or even dreamed of the possibility of anything different being than that my mom and dad were together. There was never even a thought. There was never even a possibility of it because there were boundaries that they set. And then us children started coming along, and because of the boundaries that they set amongst us children, around us children, there were things that I never dreamed. I never. It was never a prospect. There was a lot of security in our home, so there was never a thought. I don't know where we got the idea of. There was a few of us that got the idea we was going to run away. Got as far as the doormat. Caleb was all of 4 or 6 years old whenever he decided he's going to run away. So Dad packed his bag and stuck him on the doorstep, and he sat there and cried until Dad opened the door again, asking him if he's back so soon. But, I mean, other than that, I mean, and I don't know where we would have got that idea from, but anyhow, it was a secure place. Caleb never tried to run away again. He realized it was so secure at home, it was just much better to stay there instead of the doormat. So that was just because of the boundaries that my parents set. There was a place of protection. And I never wanted to override that. Oh, sure, there were things that I thought that I wanted. Well, as I got a little bit older and thought I knew better, why in the world did they do this? And but it didn't take very long. If I asked about it, which I did on occasion, they could usually give me about 9, 10, 15 examples right around us. This is why you don't do that. Because bad examples are all around. If you hadn't noticed, you can look in the world. There's a whole world full of bad examples that you can use to train your children with.
Amen.
And I highly recommend using them, because if you don't, then your children are, Brother Chris says it all the time. The greatest thing, or the number one thing that people don't learn from history, is that people don't learn from history. You know why people don't learn from history? They don't know it. They don't know their history. So if you share the history with the children, this is what they did, this is how they lived, this was the result. This is what they did, this is how they lived, this was the result. It's just, you put a bullet in a gun and you pull the trigger and it's going to shoot. That is the result. That's the sequence, that's the result, and it happens every time. So, anyway, you teach your children by using those things. And so it's very simple. If you don't teach application or the reason why there's boundaries, then, what's the good of it? They're just going to go do it themselves. If you don't, I was just teaching this to the boys on Wednesday night. These young fellas, Ian and Bryson and Seth and Ethan and Nathaniel, these guys, they're getting about that age, around 15, 16, 17, some of them close. I don't know, is Ian 18 yet? Ian's 18 now. They're starting to make decisions, getting to that age, making decisions on their own. And I remember a guy telling me, he pulled me to the side one time, and he said, you need to plan you need to plan out where you think your life is headed. Not if you want to be a mechanic or, not that kind of stuff. He said, you need to think of what you want your life to be one day. He said, and the best way you can do that is look around and you see somebody and you think, I want my life to be like that person. I want my life to be like that person. And you might pick 4 or 5 different people that you want some aspect of their life. You want to be like that. And he said, and then go talk to them about it. And he said, only learn from those that are the very best. He said, you don't go to he said, if you go learn mechanics from a 18-year-old that just started yesterday, he said, you're not going to learn. You always go to the foreman. He's been there for 25 years. He knows mechanics. He said, learn your mechanics from them. He said, whenever you see somebody, they got a good, strong marriage, that's what you want, go ask them about it. So I began to do that. So I was trying to pass it on to these fellas because they're getting about that age. And those are things, it's teaching them how to make their own boundaries all of a sudden. But anyway, that's a side note. As we get on down through here, I'm just about, I'm just past the halfway point now. So that's the basis for that's my mindset of boundaries. Most of the boundaries that I know of have been in a marriage situation or in a family situation. I've experienced the security of those kinds of boundaries. But this, when I read this, I just realized this is a little bit bigger thing. And now Nehemiah, he didn't hear about his family in distress because the walls were broken down. He heard about his people. The city of Jerusalem was broken down without walls. And I just really got thinking about what we have here as a church. Because this illustration that what I see here fits a church a whole lot better. Because you have different people with different abilities. You have different people with different strengths. And some of these people within Jerusalem, they'd built strong houses because when Sanballat and the Arabians and Tobiah would come storming in to do whatever damage they could do, well, they could get their children within that strong house. And one thing about Sanballats, they go for the easy prey. Oh, they would love to get into those strong houses. Don't get me wrong, they'd love to get in there. But if they've got easy prey out there, they're going to go for that first. That's how our enemy is the lion that talks about in Peter. He's the roaring lion that walketh about seeking whom he may get petted by, right? No, he's seeking whom he may devour. His goal is to kill and to steal and to destroy.
Amen.
And so if we don't have walls, not just around our families, not just around our marriage, if we don't have walls around our church, he's going to come in and he's going to start destroying. We've come through a year, and I think all of us recognize that we've been under some distress. And the world is, it is not a popular thing to go to church anymore. It wasn't 2019. 2020 changed that. And all of a sudden, the church is under the scope. They're becoming the enemy. Why? Because of a virus? No. Ain't got nothing to do with a virus. It's because they stand for what's right. And the world, Sanballats, don't like that. It hasn't got anything to do with that. And the evidence is all around. You can look in the government, and anybody who's standing up for anything that's right, they're suddenly looked down on. They're suddenly pushed out of their ability to do part of their job or things like that. It's not got to do with parties or any of those kinds of things. They're attacking the church. Our government as a whole. And Brother Chris mentioned it this morning. If they pass this bill that's coming up, all of a sudden this Bible and Christian literature, anything that speaks against this Bible says that what they're doing is an abomination. And because of that, they say that that's hate speech. And so therefore this is illegal. And you know what? God doesn't care what they think.
That's right.
God said it's an abomination.
Amen.
We're going to have to build some walls because we're going to be under more attack than ever.
That's right.
I don't know whether the Lord will allow that bill to pass. But you know what? He might. He might. And we're going to need to have some walls around our marriages, because that's what they're attacking. Anything that looks like God, and we were made in the image of God, and the marriage relationship is the image of Christ and the church.
Amen.
They're attacking that. All those things that are sacred, all those things that are precious, they're attacking them. So we're going to have a protection around our marriages. We're going to have a protection around our children, because if they can get our children, they've won. If they get these little ones that we have more than half of a congregation full of, if they can get these little ones, these young people, if they can pollute their minds, Sanballat has it. He's got it in the bag. And then we're going to have to protect our church. Because the church is the bride of Christ.
So true, brother.
And they hate that. They despise it because they hate Him. So here they are, Nehemiah, a single individual from a long ways off, recognizes a need. Say, they are in distress, and they're my people. I need to go there. And you know what? The good hand of God was with him.
Yeah.
If you set out to do anything for God, the good hand of God will be with you.
Amen.
What are we going to do? Our church, our families are in distress. How are we going to protect them? What are we going to build up? And then I want you to notice here in chapter 3, verse 1, it says, Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priests, and they builded the sheep gate. They sanctified it, and set up the doors of it, even unto the tower of Mia. I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce these names right, so please pardon me. They sanctified it unto the tower of Hananiel. So all of a sudden, somebody said, hey, somebody got a vision. Nehemiah got a vision. We're going to stand up. Brother Mark, would you stand up here? All of a sudden, Brother Mark, he got a vision. And he said, this was the high priest, Eliashib. Now, Brother Mark, he's a priest too, spiritually speaking. But he'd be about the equivalent of the preacher. And then all his brethren, the preachers, the other priests, they stood up with him. So let's see here. All the preachers, go ahead and stand up. All right? And now, these ones over here, would all the preachers just come over here and just start building the wall right in here? Just come right up here and start building this wall. You can just stand there just to represent, that's the wall. All right? So you have these preachers, they've stood up here and they've said, we got to do something to start building the wall. And you know what that did? They set up a gate. They set up the sheep gate. And suddenly this breach right here was filled. And the sheep gate was built. There wasn't any walls anywhere else. But this sheep gate was built and they set up the bars and everything. And you know what? Sam Ballot couldn't get through that part anymore. You say, well, what was the good of that? He can get in anywhere else. Yeah, but this is one spot they don't have to defend. Because somebody stood up and built it.
Amen.
And it was kind of a strange thing that happened next. It says right next that after they stood up, it says, Next unto them builded the men of Jericho. And next unto them builded Zachar. Let's see here. Who else? Brother Aaron, can you and your family just stand right over here along this section? And because they had somebody who built right next to them, right over here. And say, Brother Tim, would you build right next to them, just right next over? There's a place for everybody in here. And as it goes on down through here, I don't know how many names, and I'm not going to read them all, but it says, next unto them, built in verse 5, it says, Next unto them, the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles put not their necks to the work of the Lord, of their Lord. Now, this is a interesting thing. And usually this whole chapter, chapter 3, is a solid chapter of names telling of who stood up. But there are key individuals. Usually I would have read over this, and I don't know why this stuck out so much to me. But when I read this, it says, all of a sudden there were a couple people that lived within the confines of the city. And they're like, I've got a strong enough house. I don't need to build. So they're nobles. They put not their necks to the work. They're not going to do anything. There's always going to be, within a secure place, some people that just aren't going to do anything.
Right.
But you know what? You can't let that discourage you.
Right.
Because just because they didn't make up their part of the wall, that means that you should make up your part so that you can help defend that segment. You still have people to defend. You still have a responsibility. Whether they recognize their responsibilities or not, it doesn't matter. You still have a responsibility. You still have a part in this. This isn't just, these people here can't do it. You know who's got to do it? Sister Holly and Sister Allison, could you all build the next part of the wall? And let's see here. Fellas, we need somebody else to build the wall over here. Would you all help? And who else? Somebody else? Will they build the wall? Come along this section? Is there anybody else? Somebody needs to be building the wall over here. Come on, Ellie. Come up here. We need you to build. Help build. And you know something? There's something. Brother Josh, I could not help but think of you. If you read down here, it says, verse 12, I think. Yes, verse 12. Chapter 3, verse 12. It says, and next unto him repaired Shalem, the son of Elisha, or something like that, the ruler of the half part of Jerusalem, he and his daughters. Would you believe that? I couldn't help but think of Brother Josh. The Lord's blessed Brother Josh with a bunch of daughters. What a blessing. So they came up here and they're building this part. And who else? Who else is going to build? This thing can't be done. Come on. Come on up here. Yeah, if you want to build, we need everybody, anybody who will build. We need people to build. This is a wall that we're building. We need protection. We need safety. What an amazing thing. Stretch on out there, Mom. There's a crowd over here. This section's real crowded over here where they're building. We got to make that wall on around. Yeah, well, hey, the visitors need protection too, just the same as everybody else. What a blessing. Just look at that. And suddenly, in 63 days, I believe they said, the wall of Jerusalem was connected all the way around. And you know what? Everybody was safe inside. And Tobiah and Sanballat and the Arabians, they couldn't get in no more. Because when they would try to come in, they tried to come in on the Sabbath day. And, you know, that's when the devil would really like to get in. It's on the Sabbath day. He'd like to get in on a Sunday. It's whenever he can distract and cause the most damage. But they could close the gates. And they did. And they said, you guys are going to stay outside. Just look at the protection. Imagine the protection of those walls. Now, as we go down through here, you know what? There wasn't, it says at one point, it says that the son, I'm trying to find it here real quick because I'm just about done. It says the son of the goldsmith. No, it was the goldsmith, one of the goldsmiths, and the son of the apothecary. What's the apothecary? Druggist. Yep, he was the pharmacist. Yeah. So anyway, all of a sudden, he got in on it. And as each one would get up, it happened actually very much just like it did here. The preachers, they stood up. And then all of a sudden, somebody else got in on it. All of a sudden, some of these kids wanted to get in on it and say, well, Brother Josh, he got in on it. And directly, everybody pitched in. And that's how it happened. Happened just about like we just did it. Suddenly, the walls of Jerusalem were built up. Now, they had other problems that I don't have time to get into right now, but that's, as a group, as a whole group of people, if we put walls up and boundaries up, not just as in our marriages, not just in our families, but if we put boundaries up as a congregation, there are things that we don't allow in here. Some of us are going to pray. At one point, Sanballat and them were going to attack them while they were in the middle of building. And you know what they did? Half of them said, we're going to have our weapons with us, and the other half built. So they had protection while they were building. There's a job for everybody. There's a place for every. It's not these preachers. Pastor Mark, he can't do it on his own. He doesn't have. It's not a sufficient enough wall. The preachers can't do it on their own. It's not a sufficient enough wall. These families, Brother Will, he can't do it on his own. I like Brother Will. Brother Will's got a wonderful family. I've enjoyed serving with Brother Will, and he's just been such a blessing to me. Just watching his family, seeing these young children. But Brother Will can't do it on his own. And there's something about it. Brother Will and his family there, he has now allowed his children, he can now allow his children to go freely in this church because we have a wall, we have protections. But do you realize that if Brother Caleb allows Sam Ballots into his home, if he allows them to stay within the confines of his home, it suddenly exposes Brother Will's children?
Sure does.
If I allow things into my marriage, it suddenly exposes Brother Mike and Sister Joanne. If I'm not watchful, it's something we got to watch out for one another. And you know, part of being a part of a church is teaching and admonishing and encouraging. There's a position for everybody, and there's something to do with everybody. And if I see somebody if I see Brother Will, or if Brother Will sees me in need, you know what he should do? He should come say, Brother Ezra, I see that you're struggling. This is an area that you're weak in, and I'm concerned. I don't know how he might do it. I don't know what the issue might be. But the question isn't if there's going to be an issue. The question is when. And when there is an issue, what are you going to do? Are you going to be prayed up? Are you going to be in the Spirit, in fellowship with the Spirit of God, to the point that you could come and say, Brother Mark, I see this is an issue? Are you going to be in fellowship with him to the point where you could approach him? Or is there going to be strifes in the midst of us? Old Sam Ballot would love strife. Tobiah, the Arabians, that roaring lion, he would love strife amongst us. The minute he calls us strife, all of a sudden it breaks fellowship, and I can't go to Seth if me and Seth are at odds. I can't go to him and say, Brother Seth, there's an issue. I'm praying for you. I love you. There's needs. There's a need for a wall. What part are you going to have in it? What part are you going to have in it? You can be seated. I'm done, Brother Martin.